Okay. I don't know what recording with the AI companion is, but I'm afraid of it. So we're not going to do that. I don't know why I need an AI companion. Uh, so yeah, let's get started on
The
this.
CEO of Zoom is like weirdly into AI. He said a bunch of
They
stuff
all
about it.
are,
Said,
all these CEOs.
but
I think it's
specifically,
just,
the CEO of Zoom said, in 5 years, every single person is going to have an AI clone they can send to meetings. Is a specific claim he made,
I mean,
which
that
is like
sounds
he
nice.
treats it as well. I mean, it's a claim which you would only get from somebody who doesn't realize that there's such a thing as work which isn't meetings.
Yeah, like I think
Like everybody can just
the
have a clone and
reason
do what he
why
said.
all these CEOs are very into AI is because
They
if
could easily be
AI
replaced by AI, and most
is
workers could not, but they could.
yeah, but they don't want to admit that. I think it's they have this fantasy of like I could really cut down on all the labor costs if I just get
Right,
rid
but
of
they're
everybody.
wrong because AI is not going to be a janitor or like or a tester of things.
Yeah,
It's
because whatever.
AI is very good at replacing what CEOs do, which is sitting in meetings and taking notes. That's
Anyway,
what
let's
they're good
get
at.
into the
They're not good at
Kuzari.
any actual
Speaking,
creativity.
okay, speaking of sitting in meetings and taking notes. Okay, so we looked at the Kuzari, the introduction to the Kuzari, where he, where the Khazar king has his dream. He talks to a philosopher. The philosopher sort of ignores his problems. He talks to Christians and Muslims, Christian and a Muslim, not plural, just one, who doesn't answer his question. And then he talks to a Jew who he at first dismisses, and then he's like, "Oh, why didn't you say it this way at the beginning?" Right. So that's what we're up to, and he's going to let the rabbi or the chaver, as it is in the original language, let he's going to let him develop the idea. Okay. So, did anybody have questions on this bit over here? Like when they read it, did they have like their own questions? Did anybody use that thing?
I had a question.
Yes.
Where does he get the idea that the prophets all knew the exact date and time that they would die? Does he have a source for
Um,
that claim, or is that just a thing that he
where
decided?
does he say that?
In the last, he says, "What if somebody like knew every single thing that would ever happen, and he would know when he would die and be prepared for it? You know, all that stuff. He'll never get sick. He'll never age. When he dies, he will,
Okay, so that's he's
know."
not saying that the prophets do that. Okay, so
Well, he
let's
has this whole paragraph, and then it ends, and then the guy says, "Well, yeah, that would be really impressive. That would possible." And he says, "Well, that's what the prophets can do."
You said there were some of
so
the characteristics that the prophets
like
had.
what he's
How many of
saying,
the things listed there are things that the prophets can do? Is my
very
question, I
few of
guess.
them. What he's basically like the point of that paragraph is basically saying, okay, so you would like the argument goes like this, right? Um, you know how things there are things in nature, right? Okay, and those things grow, and there are things that are better than other things, and that they have certain types of intelligence, right? They're mineral, plant, animal, human, and that human beings are more intelligent or have intellect. And like, let's take note of the fact that the purpose of intellect, according to Yehuda Levi, is from which arise administrative and regulative laws. That's important. Okay. He's saying that like intellect gets you the ability to make administrative regulative laws, to make laws governing society, right? Which is going to play into what he's going to say about philosophy. Okay. So you agree that human beings are better than animals, right? Which was a question that we had last time a little bit, right? Uh, so he's saying, now, what if there was somebody who was better than you, right? This is much less about prophets than it is about superhumans, right? Those of you who watch The Boys, I don't, but this might be relevant, right? I don't think he's saying this in terms of like the prophets, walked into fire without being hurt, though there's like one of them who did. Abstains from food for some time without starving. I'm not sure. Like, I'm not sure if these are. I wasn't even aware that you could read this as like being examples from actual prophets. I think this is just saying like, what if you met a guy who could walk into fire without being burned? You would agree that that guy's better than other people, right?
I mean, I guess I was just feeling like a lot of them are things which, like, walk into fire, Avraham, according to legend,
Yeah.
Daniel, also according to Tanakh. Abstaining from food without starving, I believe there's a guy in the Talmud who, like, doesn't eat any food for, like, years or something like that. Light
I don't
shines.
think
That's
that
Moshe.
ended well for him.
Moshe's face shines with light. He
Yeah.
also never, his eyes never dim. They say that Yitzchak was the first person to ever get sick, and Yaakov, or like,
Well, that's a midrash. I'm
there's
not
like,
sure if
yes,
he's
but I
working
feel
with
like
that.
a lot of this stuff is directly from Midrash. A lot of the stuff which he is listing here is stuff which prophets do in Midrash. Very little
Right.
of it is stuff which prophets do in Tanakh, but a lot of it is stuff prophets do in
So I
Midrash.
think what's causing me to
And then some of them
disagree
are in
with you
Tanakh
on
too. The
this,
fire thing and the light shining thing are both in Tanakh.
like for Yehuda Levi, what's going to make someone better than human? Like he's giving examples of like would you agree that if you met a person who could walk in fire without being burnt, that they had like some quality that was better than human, right? But he's not going to extend this to any case other than the capacity for prophecy. He's only claiming that there are some people who have a capacity for prophecy that other people do not have, and it's a big question as to like how to describe what he's talking about, and we'll see. I prefer to describe this as unspecifically as possible for reasons I'll get into, but like he's not claiming that, this makes you superhuman in all categories. He's saying if you saw a guy, walk into a fire without being burned, that you would go like, wow, that guy's, got superhuman abilities. And he's like, now imagine that, but for like accessing God's, will, or accessing God's truth, right? So, though he does say, I am sort of ignoring the simple shot here. Those are some of the characteristics of the undoubted prophets. So maybe. I don't know. Does anybody else have any thoughts on this? Because, like, I don't see him sort of like claiming that they were like physical supermen as much as just able to had this specific, capacity for prophecy, right? There's chat here. Right. I mean, yeah, I was thinking X-Men too. Saw a guy who could walk into fire and be okay. Our response would be like, kill the freak, which I may be part of Yehuda Levi's point at the end of this, which is like, that's what we get killed for.
That's also an amazing point, Jacob. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
he was just saying all this Jesus stuff is silly, and then he says, well, what if all that stuff could happen? Like, why doesn't that argument also just work just as well for Christianity?
So
Like,
the
a
thing
lot
is
of early
with
Christianity starts from, hey, this guy did all these cool things. Isn't that impressive? Isn't he better than human?
so this is like the classic Kuzari proof that everybody in their key group rabbi talks about. That like it's a difference between being revealed to like many people versus being, revealed to only a couple of followers at the beginning. But like what am I about to say here? Give me a second as my brain catches up. What was the question? Sorry. About Christianity? Right. So like the thing is in the Christian Muslim testimonies or whatever we want to call it, both of them agree that the stuff with the Jews happened, right? So like he's sort of working off of that as like you know Christians and Muslims agree that this stuff already happened, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, but it just feels like if he'd asked the Muslim guy, did that stuff with Jesus happen? The Muslim guy would have said most of it, like 80% or so.
Yeah.
And he could have just gone from there. I
But
know
like both
I'm
of those guys, we saw in like the Khazar correspondence, right? Where the very short version of this is like, what do you guys agree on? What do you like? Would you rather me be Muslim or Jewish? I'd rather you be Jewish. Would you rather be Christian or Jewish? I'd rather you be Jewish. Oh, okay. Like there is like agreement on the two major religions of the time, right? So let's see the questions for understanding, right? According to the Khazar, what makes humanity better than animals, right?
The capability of intellect and thus the ability to have courts of law, which
Right.
is which is very Isha Halacha. I love it.
I mean, because time is a thing, and doesn't go backwards, Ishalach would be very this, but I'm not
I know.
yeah, I know. But I'm not sure, like, I'm not sure to what extent Yehuda Levi is more of an influence in the Rambam than on Rav Soloveitchik than the Rambam. But I mean, he obviously he had to have read the Kuzari at some point, right? But I will say that like uh the purpose of the intellect is to do rational things like organize human beings in society, right? And that's what human beings are good at, right? He's going to see this as connected to philosophy, right? And the limitations of philosophy are going to be like they can only get you to practicality and utility, but they can't get you anything more than that, right? That's just all what I want to point out here, right? I'm going with my reading. What is the high level above human beings according to the Khazar's first thought?
The divine and seraphic degree, if it exists at all, belonging
Right.
to the province of the divine influence, but not.
So according to like the Khazar's first thought or Havamina, I'm trying to use this little like specialized terminology as possible, right? There's like human beings and then there's God. And Yehuda Levi sort of suggests, what if there was something below God but above human beings? What if there was somebody who had like special abilities, right? According to my reading, according to Isaac's reading, this is something which is like he's using actual examples of things that prophets can do, and they're like superhuman in a real way. According to my reading, they're superhuman in one specific way, right? Okay. What the theoretical examples the rabbi brings is somebody of a degree above human. Okay, according to the rabbi who had this quality.
The prophets.
Okay, the prophets, right? The the most important person in Yehuda Levi's philosophy is the prophet, right? You can debate to what extent this is true in the Rambam also. It is definitely true in Islam, right? But the prophet matters, right? Now, what do we know thanks to those people?
Prehistory,
Prehistory, like creation of the world,
antediluvian stuff.
right? And this gets into like the big debate about creation in the medieval era between the philosophers and the religious people. Like the Torah science debate of that day was not evolution versus science, not evolution versus science. I'm sounding like Ken Ham or whatever. It was not like evolution versus creationism. It was creationism versus always having existed ism, right? So according to Yehuda Levi, we know that the world was created because of the prophets, right? Now we're going to get into the next bit. Let me see the chat here, right? Kisas al Anbiya. I don't. Whatever.
It's a
I'll look
it's
at
a
that
it's
later.
a genre of Muslim works which are like, because the Quran doesn't mention that much about prophets other than Muhammad.
Yeah,
Qisas al-Anbiya it's a term for it's literally like the stories of the prophets, and it is a collection of narratives, largely but not entirely from Jewish texts, for Muslims, which are describing
yeah,
what the prophets did. And the thing is, they almost entirely focus on what they did and not what they said. So that's why I brought it up.
yeah.
It has a lot of miracle stories in it.
Yes, that does make sense. Okay, so let's look at the next bit, right? So the Khazar starts off by saying, like, it's strange that you should have possess authentic chronology of the creation of the world. Again, this is a big debate of that era, right? Whether we can know whether the world is created or not, right? So, according to the rabbi, how old is the world? What does it say here?
4,500.
Okay, 4,500, right?
By the way,
Now,
one thing I want to mention, he says the thing about the Jews of Kuzari and Ethiopia. That is incorrect. The Ethiopian Jews have a different date. According to the Ethiopians, we're in the year 7082 right now.
Interesting. Did he know that there were Jews in Ethiopia that had, well, clearly not, but whatever. Right, so he's going off of Seder Olam, which is interesting,
Yes,
as in
it
his
is. It is different
he's
because
presenting it as like the agreement of Pshat, which is interesting because like not even Ibn Ezra will necessarily take that. Because Ibn Ezra has like different chronologies because of how old Yitzchak is at the Akedah and stuff like that, right? Important bit here, right? Before I do that, did anybody have any questions on this section that they want to cover? Okay, so let's get back to this important bit here, right? So can I have somebody look at paragraph 53/47, because Safari needs to make up its mind on what numbers these paragraphs are, right? So somebody should read this out loud so that we could look at it. Somebody want to go ahead and read it? Jacob, go ahead.
4,500 years. The details can be demonstrated from the lives of Adam, Seth, and Enosh to Noah, then Shem and Eber to Abraham, then Isaac and Jacob to Moses. All of them represented the essence and purity of Adam on account of their intimacy with God. I have questions. Each of them had children only to be compared to them outwardly, but not really like them. I have questions, and therefore without direct union with the divine influence. The chronology was established through the medium of those sainted persons who were only single individuals and not a crowd, until Jacob begat the 12 tribes who were all under this divine influence. Thus, the divine element reached a multitude of persons who carried the records further. The chronology of those who lived before these has been handed down to us by Moses.
Okay, so what questions do you have?
Each of them had children only to be compared to them outwardly, but not really like them. I mean, I understand you have this tradition that like Abraham and Isaac both have these like, I don't want to say deviant, but like these kids who didn't quite follow in the family business until Jacob gets a 100% track record, which I mean, okay.
Yeah. So this is where we get into one of the key things in interpreting the Kuzari, which is the matter of the Al-Amar al-Eluhi, okay, which is what is translated here as the divine influence, okay? I originally had divine influence every time it appears italicized. I don't know what happened to that, okay? But it is often compared, like the analogy a lot of people use, and I have issues with this, but I'm going to go with this at first, is of a gene, right? Because this is something that is transmitted from parents to children, but it is recessive gene and that it is only occasionally so, right? And that this like inherent capacity to receive prophecy is received by Adam, is transmitted through the line of shame, and not the other lines. We're going to get to that, right? And it survives in the Abrahamic line, and Yitzchak gets it, but not Esav. Yaakov gets it, and Yaakov gets it, not Esav. Yitzchak gets it, not Yishmael. Moshe gets it, right? And then all the 12 tribes get it, right? So there is this Al Amar El Elohi in the original Judeo-Arabic, and like a lot of the secondary literature on the Kuzari, I wouldn't say most, is talking about like what does this mean? And my personal favorite is, and I think the one that I think is the most accurate is Amar Ilahi be translated as the divine thing. Okay, it is a thing, a thingamajiggy, a whatchamacallit, that gives somebody the capacity for prophecy. Okay, I like the analogy that I prefer is like an antenna. right? There's, God sending out, messages, and certain people have that antenna that is part of their makeup, right? And only certain people get it. And Jews have that, and other people don't. Okay. Right. So, like, one of the people that I've seen, Diana Lobel, says that, like, Yehuda Levi, who definitely was a good writer, didn't choose to, do this to give you a very non-specific term just because he, forgot. It allows him to sort of be impressionistic and inexact with it in a way that allows it to do multiple things, right? So, like, the way that I would define this divine influence is the thing that allows one to be a prophet. Okay. It could also mean, oh man, I lost my place in my notes. Like, it could also, remember the analogy with the King of India, right? So it could also mean like the divine order. So it could mean like, belonging to that order, belonging to the sovereignty of, the kingdom of God and its messengers, right? But, like, the main point you need to get here is that this is a inborn trait that is transmitted inconsistently, but only among Jews, that allows one to have prophecy. Okay. Now, I think, like, we're gonna see this has its strengths, it has its weaknesses, but let's just go on. Okay. All right. So now the Khazar king, sorry. Sorry. I need my Fresca. Oh no, Nietzsche has fallen into the abyss. Uh he stared too long into it, and you know how that goes. And now Kierkegaard is going to take a leap of faith into the absurd. Anyway, that's just some entertainment. Okay.
I'll be right back. I have to quit and rejoin. I'm having tech issues.
Okay. So, why does the Khazar find this believable?
It's too well coordinated to be a conspiracy.
Okay, so there's, to some extent this is okay. To some extent this is a good point, because, like, you ever try to do a group project, right? But yeah, so that's, like, sort of a lot of the basis of the Kuzari is, like, but this is to, like, many people as opposed to just an individual, right? Anyway,
Can I
yeah, go ahead.
I heard a Kiruv speaker once use this as his foundation for, like, this is why Judaism is definitely true, and I still don't feel like it holds water.
It When you Levi Mara wrote a piece that I haven't read completely yet, but he talks about, like, the limitations of the Kuzari argument within the Kuzari.
Mhm.
It is a good proof against Christianity and Islam
That feels fair.
when those are the alternatives. As
Yeah.
we'll see when it comes into contact with other traditions, it sort of runs into problems. And we'll see, like, littered throughout history are people who believe, like, one of the things that he'll claim is that people would not believe lies told about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, they do that all the time.
People love to believe lies about themselves.
Like, the famous example is kilts. Like, turns out Scottish people did not actually wear skirts, like, with, like, the colors of their clan or whatever. That was sort of invented in the 1800s, but managed to convince a lot of people that that's what they did in ancient times or whatever, right? So this is a thing that happens, which is why there are limitations on this sort of argument, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Lahavdil, I was thinking about fascism. I was thinking about how many people throughout history have loved to have been told that their ethnicity invented everything cool and is inherently better than other ethnicities, despite the fact there's absolutely no evidence that is ever the case.
Okay, yeah, I mean, like, we're reading the Kuzari right now. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
I wouldn't call him fascist, but
No, I'm not saying he's fascist. I'm talking about, I guess just ethno-nationalism in general, which he might not be fascist, but he's definitely ethno-nationalist.
definitely
I think the
ethno-nationalist.
Jews are special because of
Yeah,
our background.
yeah. So, like, one of the claims that he's making here is that Hebrew was the original language, and Aver was one of the only people who passed on the original language to his descendants, right?
When we bring up the Nabatean agriculture, that'll be relevant because
Yes.
that claims that Syriac was the original language, and actually all the ancestors spoke Syriac.
Yeah. Which was not a language that was, that old.
Yeah.
Anyway, but
supposedly there's a famous, I guess if you want to be polite, linguist named Johann Goropius, who wrote a book which claimed that the original language of humanity was Brabantian Dutch as spoken in Antwerp, which turned out to be his native language. And he claimed that clearly because since it has the shortest words, that means it's the most ancient language. And because of that, in modern linguistics, the term for anybody who claims my language is the oldest and every other language it comes from it and is worth from it is Goropism. So
I don't think that's how it works. Yeah.
You're denying that Adam and Eve spoke Dutch? How dare you, you heretic?
I mean, have you seen Dutch? Like, it's English spoken with a funny accent. Isaac is probably either furiously agreeing with me or furiously not agreeing with me.
I mean, it's closer to English than German is, but
Okay.
That's not much.
Yeah. Anyway, so one thing I found interesting here is that, how could you invent something how could you claim that something is invented, the latter being less than 500 years old? And just like a fun insight into their world is that they had books that were written within 500 years, right? No false interpolation can enter the contents of a book which is not above 500 years of age, such as genealogical tables, linguistic, and other works. Yeah, that can never happen. Whatever. This is not the strongest part of the Kuzari. I'm sorry, right?
That was actually fascinating to me, that line. Again, I'm sorry to keep on bringing up the Nabatean agriculture when we haven't even got to it yet. But one of the arguments that when it first came out, and this will make more sense when we get to it, when one of the arguments that people used about it was that it must have been the original because Semitic languages don't change. That was a claim that apparently people in Europe believed at the time.
Oh, okay.
We'll get to it.
That's interesting. Okay. So, he also brings proof from the fact that but I do think this works, that the Torah is very honest about the fact that Moshe was contradicted at the time. But nobody and I do think, first of all, I'll say this parenthetically, of all the medieval philosophers, I think the Kuzari and Yehuda Levi is the one that is most similar to that of Tanakh. He gets Tanakh, I think, on a level that most people do not. Tanakh is a book very concerned with God's interference in history, and that's the Kuzari, right? So he's a good reader of Tanakh, and he notices that people contradict Moshe's speeches, but they don't contradict the idea that they are one people who came from Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, right? They don't they're very aware that they come from a common origins, and that's not their issue with him, right? Okay, now this next bit. I'm interested what Isaac has to say here because he's a linguist, and this talks about languages.
Oh, the Kuzari here is literally just being Noam Chomsky.
Yeah.
He's pulling universal grammar. That's what he's doing.
Yes.
The Kuzari is saying, listen, yeah, people, a lot of people who are, proud Zionists will say things like, I really hate Chomsky because of his politics. I really hate Chomsky because of his linguistics. But that's another issue. He's like, well, obviously, all languages must have come from something because all languages have nouns and verbs. It's like, okay, sure. No, that's a classic bit of
Yeah.
Chomskyan universalism.
Yeah, I
You can
remember,
find examples
like,
which contradict every single one of those, but
I remember
don't let
when
that
I was
stop you.
presented with Chomsky in Psych 101, I was like, well, this is pretty cool and he's got some interesting ideas, but like this seems very medieval. Like this, like my medieval philosophy is BS alarm went off in my head of like, this is the kind of thing a medieval guy would say. Like, oh yeah, this is clearly universal. But anyway, like it is a kind of thing a medieval guy would say. He's saying it. Yehuda Levi, despite his best efforts, was a man of the medieval era. So I'm like, he's basically saying that like everybody talks, but nobody that we know of sat down, except for like nerds in the 19th to 21st centuries, sat down and decided, okay, we got to do a new language now, right?
I literally gave a presentation at Pardes about conlangs.
Yeah. And
also, Hildegard von Bingen invented one 1,000 years ago. So,
okay.
she's someone's
like,
called the patron saint of
most
conlangs.
languages have not been conlangs. Is that correct?
I mean, it depends on how you define conlang. A lot of languages, I feel like you could argue, are purposely designed forms. Like, probably nobody ever spoke Aramaic that sounds like the Targum. The Targum was designed specifically to be a
Right.
general Aramaic dialect that everybody who spoke Aramaic at the time could understand. But I mean, that's nitpicking.
But like,
Obviously, there was nothing like Klingon at the time when the Kuzari was being written, with the possible exception of Hildegard von Bingen, who I think had already invented lingua ignota at the time.
but like to our knowledge, the person the farthest back we can take language is like Proto-Indo-European or something like that, and like Proto-Indo-European was not one guy deciding like, hey, we should call those things, right? I mean, I don't know.
I mean, the word in Proto-Indo-European for horse literally means fast guy. So probably someone saw a horse and was like, wow, that guy's fast.
That's true. I mean, the Indo-Europeans might have been responsible for the horse. Whatever.
I mean, they domesticated it, but also like somebody named it at some point.
Yeah.
And the
that sure is
Indo-European
a
word for
fast
horse
boy.
literally means, yeah, no, there's a whole Tumblr feed where someone said it means speedy boys, which is the most Tumblr way of putting it.
That is true. Anyway, so I think the language proof is like much more compelling than the numbers proof, which is Yehuda Levi is like, wow, why does everybody base their numbers on base 10? Oh gee, I don't know. That's it. Like, come on, man, you're better than this. Right?
Also, the 7-week thing, the 7-day thing doesn't work either because there are many cultures which don't, in fact, have a 7-day week.
Yeah.
And didn't even become mainstream in Rome until Christianity. And the Chinese learned it from the Romans, or probably from the Persians who learned it from the Romans.
Yeah, the Persians
there's a reason why in almost every language on Earth, the word for Saturday is something like Yom HaSabt or Sabado, and it's because like that's not really a universal thing as much as a bunch of people learned it from us.
Yeah, so
that's also
take
true.
Into account the smallness.
There's other base systems too. That's true. In German, in Old English, 100 was 144, and also the Inuits have a base 20 system. So
okay, so back to what I was saying. Okay, we have to take into account the smallness of Yehuda Levi's world to some extent. Like, to him, like, this stuff was universal, and it was an interesting thing to observe that like it was universal. He didn't necessarily have the tools to think about like why that might be, except for the hands. I'm bothered by the hands thing. Like, he was smarter than that. I'm bothered by it. Right? Now we get to this thing about India, which is weak.
Also, that is an accurate statement of a thing Hindus believe. That is part
the
of
world is
Part of Hindu belief is that the world is that there are millions of year olds thing, that the world is like
yeah.
infinitely old. That is like the text is not incorrect about the fact that Indians believe the world is incredibly
Right.
ancient. This is
They
the part where the
had
Nabatean agriculture
contact with Indian culture. Like they interacted and like merchants interacted. Like is one of the things that is a limitation when you're studying history as like propounded by states is that like there's all these people who traverse the boundaries between states, all these merchants who went back and forth from like Spain and India, who would like bring back stories like the we talked I just said that Yehuda Levi lived in a small world, but like it was bigger than you would necessarily think, right? So and I'll talk about this at the end, like how I think we can rescue Yehuda Levi's thought here, or come up with something better based on his sort of sort of ideas. But like his dismissal of India, like he's told that they have a tradition of it being of having creation longer than thousand than than that of the Bible, and he's like, well, they're not reliable. Like at a certain point, you run up against a limitation in Yehuda Levi that like, well, he's not coming to he's coming to discuss his religion and his particular belief system. And it is going to disregard other belief systems. It is going to do that. And he may not have like great answers, right? But I think, like, I don't think this is what Yehuda Levi thought he was doing, but I think what he is doing is presenting a view of Jewish religion from the inside, right? That our tradition is accurate because we have, this divine gift and theirs is not. And that runs up against like, and he wants it to make universal sense, but he's going to run up against limitations there. Okay.
So can I
There
talk a little bit about the Nabatean agriculture as we go
Yeah,
through
so
this?
he
This
makes
one thing.
reference to this book, The Nabatean Agriculture, and every time I looked for it, all I found was references to the Kuzari. And then Isaac over here finds it at the last second.
So the Nabatean agriculture is a pretty famous book from, or at least at the time it was pretty famous. It was probably written around the 10th century in Iraq. The book itself, written by a guy named Ibn I don't remember exactly how it's pronounced, Ibn Wahshiyah, claims to be an ancient Syriac work. He claims it was written by the ancient Babylonians in Syriac, the language they did not speak. But what it actually is like a very fascinating depiction of some of the last pagans in Iraq. A lot of this is from a book by Jacko Hameen called The Last Pagans in Iraq, a good name for the book, which features some excerpts from it. It's a sort of very unique, sort of weird book. It features a lot of stuff from all sorts of different cultures. One of the things it features is one of our most thorough descriptions of the custom of weeping for Tammuz. But its sort of introduction, he has this line. He says, it was written in ancient Syriac. It was written by a guy named Sagrith, who lived more than 7,000 years ago. He added it from stuff written to a guy named Yan Bushad, who added it to stuff by Kuthama, making the whole thing around 21,000 years old. He also, and it's a very sort of interesting, it has context about a lot of stuff about agriculture. It has stuff about sort of myths and folklore, and it has this claim that Adam was not the ancestor of all people, but rather the ancestor of a few peoples, the Chaldeans, the Canaanites, and a few others. It also, so the famous story about this text is that in the 19th century, it was sort of, I don't want to use the word discovered because it was always known about. Actually, Maimonides, Rambam cites it in the Moreh Nevuchim as examples for what pagans believe. But but it was sort of rediscovered by Europeans in the 19th century before cuneiform was translated. And there was a major debate in Europe at the time as to whether or not this was an accurate depiction of what the Babylonians believed. And once cuneiform sort of was developed, then they realized a lot of this just seems to be jumbled up text from the Roman era, some things that he noticed people in his part of Iraq were doing at the time. And like this whole section at the beginning where he says it's 21,000 years old was basically an excuse. And because of that, it really has been understudied, because once it turned out that wasn't the case, then people started ignoring the interesting stuff in there. But it is actually a very interesting and weird book. And for a lot of the rabbis at the time, from Yehuda Levi to Rambam to people like that, it was the source for what idolaters believed. Because there were not that many books on what idolaters believed, and this one has a lot of information about what idolaters believed.
So it turns out that he was right that it wasn't 21,000 years old.
Yes. He was.
Okay, so
yes,
he's got that going for him.
But also it's interesting that he sort of messed up the names. Although that also could be
well, that makes
like,
sense, because by the time it gets to Spain. Right.
Yeah.
So then,
but they do claim that Adam studied under Jan Bouchard. That is one of the claims in the book. So it seems like he did in fact have access to this book. He just didn't trust it, and he was correct to not do so.
So yeah, he's got that going for him. Too little credit.
If you want to read the book, it's called. If you would like to learn more about this book, I would recommend this work. It's called, like I said, the last pagans of Iraq, Ibn Wahshiyya and his Nabatean agriculture. It was published in 2006. I am not legally going to tell you. You can get it off of LibGen, but you can if you would like, maybe.
Okay. So just want to get back to this.
If you don't want to pay Brill $700 for something, which probably the person who wrote it would send you for free.
I do want to get back to this. Okay. So then he has a little bit of racism over here, like a reference to, like, if I had supported my arguments by reference to a, Black people, i.e. a people not united upon a common law. It's interesting to me that he sees, I guess, Africa as like not united upon a common law, as opposed to India, which was, right? But the main challenge here is from the philosophers, right? And the philosophers who claim that the world is, always has been and was not created, right? So what is he going to say about the philosophers? Like, does anybody who read this want to try to sum up in their own words, like, what excuse does he make for the philosophers?
They can't connect their antennae to God because they were too far north.
Yeah. Or they weren't from the line of shame. They weren't, part of the Semitic line that received this, divine influence, right? Or this divine thing, right? So, right? They didn't have this. So they did the best they could, right? And this fits into the general theme with the Kuzari, which is that philosophy and rationality only take you so far, right? Aristotle, according to, Yehuda Levi, Aristotle did the best with what he could without, any sort of divine influence, right? If you have no prophecy, no, tradition of prophetic revelation, then the best you can do is Aristotle, and good for him. But that's not, necessarily the truth, right? And like significant, this is, one of the most significant quotes in the Kuzaris, which I underlined to show you that it's one of the most significant quotes in the Kuzari, right? Does the Kuzari have a problem with science? Is he a conservative who will tell you that if you have the Torah and you have science, you should listen to the Torah instead? Well, look at this. Heaven forbid that there should be anything in the Bible that contradicts that which is manifest or proved, right? Yehuda Levi says it can't be that the Torah contradicts something which is readily apparent or provable, right? The purpose of my system, says Yehuda Levi, is not to contradict science, or not to, more precisely, to contradict what can be empirically proven, right? Which is interesting because he's not He doesn't reject philosophy. He rejects it as the only source of truth, right? So, right? So with the question of creation, right? Look, in the Mordevuthim, right? The Rambam goes and has like a whole sort of, you could sort of see his soul sort of like, struggling with, okay, so we don't really know what to do with, we don't really know how to reconcile these two, but I'm going to say that, like, I don't think Plato, I forgot which one he thinks is not scientifically proven and which one, whatever. He ends up, I forgot exactly the thing with Rambam, right? With Yehuda Levi, he's pretty simple. He says, look, there's no definitive proof about creation. There's no directly observable, as far as he knew, uh, evidence of creation, or, there's obviously not going to be evidence of the world. There's not going to be negative evidence of the world not having been created, right? So, tradition in that sense, like going on over here, tradition, which, as we talked about last time, is like sense data then transmitted through people, is a reliable source of information, and that breaks the tie, right? We don't know whether or not there was creation. Comes our tradition, which is enriched by these prophets, comes to tell us that there was creation. Now, he ends up being right on this, so hooray for him, right? um what did I want to say here? Okay, like, so the question, first of all, does anybody have any questions on anything I've said so far? Nope. Okay. So let me say this. Like I said before, that he sort of rejects uh the, the Indians, which the Indian subcontinent, which claims to have a tradition longer than, 4,500 years, right?
To clarify, I don't think he's just talking about India, because the Nabatean agriculturalists from Iraq, I think he's just talking about pagans in general, or people who claim their heritage is older than the Bible.
Yeah. So I think India is like the primary example for that, just because, like, it's gone, Christianity and Islam have gone, as far as they have. Um, I don't know what he knew about China, right? But like I will say, just from what I know about Indian texts, is that they actually kind of prove Yehuda Halevi's general argument correct, in that they transmit information about past events like reasonably faithfully, in ways that, like, we figured out in ways that, like, we figured out, like, oral traditions are actually much more accurate than people believe they are, because a lot of stuff that we find, historical proof for, like, is in oral traditions. Like, there are Native Americans that have traditions of coming over the Bering Strait, the Bering Land Bridge. There are,
But there are
you
also
know,
Native Americans of traditions that they come out from like lakes.
yeah, I
It's
know.
a mixed bag.
Like, it's a mixed bag, but it is a potential source of information. It is a potential source of information. Like, I think that, Yehuda Levi is in his particular world. Um, I don't think, like, India was a live option at all. And he basically dismisses the chronologies of other cultures by going, like, well, they're not trustworthy. In this particular case, like, this text was not trustworthy. But I think, like, we can use, like, I was talking with Levi, who helps me prepare for this, and like, I sort of floated an idea, and he said that's not what Yehuda Halevi says, but it is an interesting idea nonetheless. That like we can sort of, instead of saying this as like a specific Jewish trait of like having an antenna for like divine truth or whatever, divine prophecy or whatever, we could see this as like inborn to human beings in general, the ability to appreciate stuff beyond utility and rationality, like an appreciation for the aesthetic, for art and stuff like that. I like to talk all the time. I like to talk about something which I found very interesting that I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but my niece, when she was like a little baby, was crying in the car, and we couldn't get her to stop crying. We're in the back, and then her mom, my sister-in-law, goes, get your phone and put on Sugar by Maroon 5. We're like, you guys listen to Maroon 5? And they're like, no, we don't. We're like, what? And they're like, just trust us. And then we pull it up. My wife pulls it up on her phone. She starts playing the song. She like, baby immediately is quiet, is calmed down. Right. And
See,
then
that's very different from me. If I were to have to listen to Sugar by Maroon 5, I'd start crying.
yeah. So getting to the next part of the story, a couple of weeks later, same thing happens with a friend where like their son is crying and won't be quiet. And then he's like, pull up the Narwhal song on your phone.
Well, that makes
And
sense. That's
yeah,
baby cat
that's a
right there.
comforting song, right? The same thing happens. And it's not like either of these kids were raised in an environment in which like they were, like I'm saying, there was something in their, I don't even want to say brains, but something in their souls that was touched by these specific songs that was unique to them. Like we all have some kind of thing in our, I would like, not even brains, but our souls, that is looking for some, something that is something that is specific to us, right? And I think that's a human trait rather than a specifically Jewish trait. Now, it like based on where Yehuda Levi goes with this, and also like I guess like an adapted Yehuda Levi would say that we come from a tradition that is ideal for developing that antenna. We happen to have the best reception or whatever, uh and I think like uh but that doesn't mean that other people don't have that. Like that would be my own take, but I'm not Yehuda Halevi, and you're not studying my works. You're studying Yehuda Halevi's works, right? But I do think that like his effort to come up with a internal justification for how Judaism justifies itself, number one, was always going to be limited because it was always going to accept certain sources of information as more valid than others. And number two, like uh it gives a general path to how this could go. I don't know. What do you like? Does that make sense to you guys? What do you guys think? Um, I don't know. What do you guys think?
I mean, I'm trying to figure out sort of what you're saying here. You're sort of, is there something you're saying about creativity as the human, that there's a
Yeah,
human?
which is what I think, which is what I'm borrowing kind of from Yehuda Halevi, because we'll see like his conception of prophecy and whatever and stuff. Like he has definitely much more of a sense of the aesthetic than the Rambam. And like just from what we've seen today, right? I forgot to stress this
No,
point, but it is an important point.
I'm just,
The
now I'm
capacity for
imagining
prophecy is not
Yehuda
a
Levi
rational
and the
faculty.
Rambam at an art museum. And I feel like Yehuda Levi would like get into it, and the Rambam would
Yeah,
just be like, I don't understand this.
yeah. Like specifically in the text that we've seen today, and I forgot to stress this point, but it is a point worth stressing. The the facility for prophecy, whatever you want to, the divine influence, whatever, is specifically not rational. as opposed to the Rambam who sees it as a development of rationality. It is specifically not rational, and that fits with what he says to what the Khazar King says to the philosopher, that like, for all your talk about how if you become the most rational, you'll join the ranks of the greatest, wisdom and whatever. Prophets aren't philosophers, right? So there is Yehuda Levi specifically denying that there's a connection between rationality and prophecy, and he's saying that rationality is like what we human beings do with our intelligence and logic to organize society, to make civil society. But there is a level above that, which is prophecy. And the best you can do with rationality and logic is what Aristotle has done, right? But you need this super rational, this above rationality, which is located in the aesthetic to some extent. We'll see. I think I'll develop that idea. He'll develop that idea. But it's important to note it is not rational, right? And I'm inclined to see that in our appreciation for the things that are not rational in life. Stuff that stuff that makes you go I like that, but I don't know why. Does that make sense? Sorry for interrupting. Anyone else want to contribute, want to add anything before I wrap this up? And then I'm going to send you out a reading tomorrow morning. All right. Okay, I'll put the recording up on Substack paid and also put it up on YouTube on an unlisted link. And hopefully people who were not here don't feel discouraged from coming next time. And people who are here are back also next time. Okay, so
I asked ChatGPT to write a short play where Yehuda Levi and Rambam visit an art museum, and I just wanted to read the fact that the first sentence they give Rambam is, "Remember, art is but a reflection. The true pursuit lies in understanding the essence beyond these forms."
Very.
That's what happens when you feed a bunch of
Yes.
Platonism into a text predictor algorithm.
Yeah.
And Yehuda Levi says, "I wish to drink deeply from the well of human expression," which I don't know if you
Honestly, yeah, I'm going to stop recording.